Or is that's how we have? We don't have.
Oh, that's okay. That's fine. That's fine.
Let me see if there is. No, I think they gave another option. Let's see if this works. Let me try.
Do you need a virtual background? Oh, this is fine. But do you really need a virtual background? Like,
Yeah.
that's okay. That's okay.
Sir,
Sridhar, hogada?
Ah.
3, 2, 1, go. Hogi.
Arvind,
You know.
we are live on YouTube and.
Sridhar, can we go live on Zoom?
Yeah, we are live on Facebook and I'm going to launch it on Zoom now.
Yeah, please do it. Yeah.
Just a minute. Yes, we are live on Zoom and YouTube both.
Okay, shall we start then?
Yeah.
Okay, start ಮಾಡ್ತೀರಾ? Will you start?
ನೀವು ಮಾಡಿ ಅರವಿಂದ್, ಹೇಳಿ, ತೊಂದರೆ ಇಲ್ಲ.
Okay, good morning, Dr. Suraj and other friends from the US, and good evening to all our Indian friends. Before we start with Suraj, I request Bhairappa to sing a song. It is called Horatada Hadugalu in Karnataka. I'm sure you must have listened to one of them when you have visited Bengaluru. So Bhairappa would be singing one of those songs. Bhairappa, please.
Thank you, sir. A poem written by N.K. Hanumantaya. ಪರ್ವತದ ಪಾದಗಳೇ ಸ್ಪರ್ಶಗಳೇ ಶಿಶುವಿನ ಎದೆ ಮೇಲೂ ಮಲಗುವ ನಿದ್ರೆಗಳೇ ಪರ್ವತದ ಪಾದಗಳೇ ಸಿಡಿಲಿನ ಸ್ಪರ್ಶಗಳೇ ಶಿಶುವಿನ ಎದೆ ಮೇಲೂ ಮಲಗುವ ನಿದ್ರೆಗಳೇ ಹಗಲು ಇರುಳು ಉರಿಯುತ್ತಿರುವ ಕುಲದ ಕುಲುಮೆ ನಂದಿಸಿ ಹಗಲು ಇರುಳು ಉರಿಯುತ್ತಿರುವ ಕುಲದ ಕುಲುಮೆ ನಂದಿಸಿ ಬೆಂದು ಕೆಂಡವಾಗುತ್ತಿರುವ ಜೀವಗಳ ಉಳಿಸಿ ಛಲವು ಬತ್ತಿ ನೆಲವು ಹತ್ತಿ ಧಗಧಗಿಸುವ ಮುನ್ನವೇ ದನಿಯ ಆಲಿಸಿ ನದಿಯ ದನಿಯ ಆಲಿಸಿ ದನಿಯ ಆಲಿಸಿ ನದಿಯ ದನಿಯ ಆಲಿಸಿ ಹೊಲಸು ಎಂಬ ವಿಷದ ತೊಗಲ ತನುಮನಕ್ಕೆ ಮೆತ್ತದಿರಿ ಹೊಲಸು ಎಂಬ ವಿಷದ ತೊಗಲ ತನುಮನಕ್ಕೆ ಮೆತ್ತದಿರಿ ಕಣ್ಣ ಅಗಲ ಗರ್ಭ ತುಳಿದು ನೆತ್ತರನ್ನು ಚೆಲ್ಲದಿರಿ ಕಾಡು ಕಣಿವೆ ಕಡಲು ಕೊಳೆತು ಗತಗತಿಸುವ ಮುನ್ನವೇ ದನಿಯ ಆಲಿಸಿ ನದಿಯ ದನಿಯ ಆಲಿಸಿ ಪರ್ವತದ ಪಾದಗಳೇ ಸಿಡಿಲಿನ ಸ್ಪರ್ಶಗಳೇ ಶಿಶುವಿನ ಎದೆ ಮೇಲೂ ಮಲಗುವ ನಿದ್ರೆಗಳೇ ಮಹಾರಿನ ಮಹಾನದಿ ನಮ್ಮ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಪ್ರಾಣ ನದಿ ಮಹಾರಿನ ಮಹಾನದಿ ನಮ್ಮ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಪ್ರಾಣ ನದಿ ಅಕ್ಷರದ ಹನಿ ಹನಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಉಕ್ಕಿ ಅರಿದ ಪ್ರೇಮ ನದಿ ಬಿಡುಗಡೆಯ ಹಸಿರು ಉಸಿರು ಬುದ್ಧ ನಗೆಯ ತಾಯಿ ನದಿ ಅಕ್ಷರದ ಹನಿ ಹನಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಉಕ್ಕಿ ಅರಿದ ಪ್ರೇಮ ನದಿ ಬಿಡುಗಡೆಯ ಹಸಿರು ಉಸಿರು ಬುದ್ಧ ನಗೆಯ ತಾಯಿ ನದಿ ದನಿಯ ಆಲಿಸಿ ನದಿಯ ದನಿಯ ಆಲಿಸಿ ದನಿಯ ಆಲಿಸಿ ನದಿಯ ದನಿಯ ಆಲಿಸಿ ಪರ್ವತದ ಪಾದಗಳೇ ಸಿಡಿಲಿನ ಸ್ಪರ್ಶಗಳೇ ಶಿಶುವಿನ ಎದೆ ಮೇಲೂ ಮಲಗುವ ನಿದ್ರೆಗಳೇ. ಧನ್ಯವಾದಗಳು ಸರ್.
Thank you, Bhairappa, for soulful rendering of the song. I welcome all to this session. When government first got college, Bellary thought of organizing a discussion on the caste. Most people questioned us actually. They said that India is on the verge of a technological revolution, and maybe in a couple of decades would also become the superpower. And also they said caste is thing of the past and it's not relevant right now. So what's the necessity of discussing on caste? So all of us have just one answer to them. There is a very famous website that discusses films, and there are two important film critics known nationwide. They never ask questions to Shah Rukh Khan or even Madhavan that why do you guys keep on doing romantic films, and why don't you do a film on caste suppression or even caste system or even caste politics? But they went and asked Paranjit and Neeraj Gaiwan and even Nagaraj Manjule, three important voices of Indian cinema. They went and asked that you have already done a film or a couple of films on caste system, oppression, and politics. Then why are you doing it again and again? Can't you do something else? So when you have these kinds of upper caste ideologues masquerading as liberal film critics, liberal intellectuals, and liberal politicians, asking these kinds of questions, having these kinds of intentions, I would strongly say that caste matters and caste will matter. Before we start the discussion, I would like to share a narrative with you. A few years ago, in the Dalit neighborhood of Nanded, a boy was growing. He was living in a very small house, and all he had was an ailing father and two women in his house. One is his mother and one is his grandmother, struggling to meet their ends. His grandmother was working as a maid in one of those rich households, and she never took her very curious grandchild to that particular house because she didn't want him to see her plight there. But this curious kid follows her to the house and then sees his grandmother cleaning the bathroom. Somehow he feels the urge to pee, to use the loo. He sneaks into the bathroom and uses it. So the 40 seconds act, this very simple act, natural act of this 40 seconds makes his grandmother very anxious. And he comes out and he thinks that nobody has identified it. But the Malkin, who hasn't been a witness to this incident, somehow becomes suspicious and somehow guesses that what has happened just a moment before. She becomes furious and her fury knows no bounds. So on that particular day, this particular boy realizes his beingness within the realm of the caste. He goes to an English school, a convent. The class is full, but still he couldn't make more friends. All he has is around 3 to 4 friends, mostly belonging to his caste. And he realizes that somehow he's getting different kind of treatment. But he braves all his odds. He then goes to Mumbai, and then to the UK, and then Johannesburg, and then to the US. And right now he is a postdoc fellow at Schonstein Center of Public Policy, Media, and Politics. And the protagonist of this particular reality is Dr. Suraj Yengde. Suraj Yengde is associated with very important movements like Dalit International Film Festival, Dalit International Film and Cultural Festival, and also right now is identified with Black Lives Matter. And I would like to say a couple of more sentences about his very important book, Caste Matters. So this is the book. And this book has, I personally feel, several books, if you read, it would give you knowledge, information, but this is the book that would change your perspective to look into the caste and caste system and oppression. It has 6 very important sections, and in these sections, he thoroughly identifies the history of caste and its present, and how it's widespread, and how it's encapsulating all of us, and how it reappears in each and every forum. And why I admired this particular book for a very simple reason is that I don't know if I can say this, in the recent past, I have never come across any other non-fiction which is as self-critical. Suraj, please say it. I think you would agree with this, as self-critical or as self-evaluative or as self-reflective as this book is. So, and also I'm extremely happy to read this book. I think you can see an excited me simply because he identifies very important new concepts like castegorism and also the myth of hard work, which is linked to privilege vis-a-vis. We also analyze the idea of merit. So he busts this myth, and very important topics like Dalit capitalism and also Brahminical ideology. So to discuss all these things and also to hear Dr. Suraj speak, we have invited him, and also we would thank Prashant Ingole to organize all these things and to help us read Suraj. So now I request Now I request Dr. Suraj, who is the author of Caste Matters, to speak on this issue, social sciences and its social sciences and caste system in India. I think he has told Prashant that he would change the topic a bit. That's completely fine. So you would be revealing it later. So now I request Prashant to address the gathering. Prashant, sorry. Now I request Suraj to address the gathering. Suraj.
No, thank you very much, Arvind. At the outset, let me also thank Sridhara for reaching out of the blue. I'm not accepting any more invites to speak as I had decided. I also need to concentrate on some of my writing. But because the invite was from Karnataka and was from a college, I felt compelled that I have to spend time with you guys, specifically from the regions and institutes which are not very well known, which are not in the center of any states or the national capitals. And I think this is the purpose. I am personally very invested in to give more attention and give more time to the people who belong to the marginalized geographies as well as left out economies. So I'm very personally pleased, and thank you so much, Arvind, for that generous introduction and your endorsement of Caste Matters. The book, as you have said, is self-critical, and that has been one of the bone of contention. When we make change, if change is easy, then every day change would have occurred. It's only epochal change that happens. And that's why it's no accident that a Brahmin born Basava goes on to challenge the hegemony of Brahmins themselves. And make no mistakes that Basava was not a Brahmin, he was a Kshatriya. And
Dr. Suraj's connection is a bit unstable. He will be back in a few seconds.
We are extremely sorry for this error. Please wait. Prashant, hope you're in touch with Suraj.
He message texted me and he will be joining.
I am back. I'm so sorry. My internet here, although we live in America, but doesn't make us any immune to not mess up. My apologies for dropping off. And also, I would like to dedicate my today's talk to the great legacy of Ambedkar,
Did we lose Suraj again? Like,
I think so.
Yeah.
He will be
Yeah,
back.
he's
He
back.
will be
He's
back.
back.
we are extremely sorry for this error.
Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible. Suraj, yeah, audible. Yes.
I express my apology again. It has been happening since past few days that Zoom is not cooperating on our internet. So if I drop, I'm really sorry, but I will try to come back whenever. It's just the fluctuation of internet. I would like to dedicate this talk to the legacy of Dalit Sangharsh Samiti, and it is upon them also the linguistic fervor and the nationalism of Kannada people who believe in their own spirits to lead a certain epochal uh, change if they would like to have, but also would like to consider that humanity belongs on a common plane. And I think within the Indian Constitution that all unites us, made by the the great constitutionalist, Baba Sahib Ambedkar, under whose leadership we all gather. I would also like to thank Prashant for coordinating this with our friends in Belavi. The topic that we have today is about social sciences. It's a very important topic, and I think this needs to be discussed more prominently, as much as it is not discussed, because what happens in social sciences discipline is whenever a student enters a social sciences institution, the student is not exposed to the nuances of social sciences. The student just enters the college or university, acquires the degree, and graduates hoping to get a new job. There was a time when social sciences was almost equated with getting into civil services or getting any clerical level jobs, not beyond anything that. It was only the purveyor of certain caste, mostly Brahmins, who were the protectors of knowledge, who ended up writing PhDs and then becoming um, the gatekeepers, if you will, of the knowledge. Now, this has been changing, obviously, in the past 4 decades, as we have seen a steady rise, but a certain rise that is happening. But in the post neoliberal era, we have seen a rise of various marginalized communities entering into institutes of higher learning to acquire this knowledge. So let's break this down: what social sciences is, why do we need social sciences, and if at all it is relevant in contemporary times. To begin with, we have to underscore what is social. There are 3 types of social, is how I look at the sociality of borrowing, the sociality of giving, and third, the sociality of acquiring. 3 layers operate in this. The sociality of borrowing, it's a social is a co-shared space within the borrowing aspect, which means I want to socialize with someone else. And this space is almost of an equality, where I come and I bring my agency, I bring my weight, I bring my thought into a space that we both acquire. And this could be a borrowing space. Let us borrow each other's ideas. Let us borrow each other's time, intellect, experience, theories, and let's try to think what we can do collectively. This borrowing is not about borrowing from someone else, but it is a borrowing of a space that is already given. Nobody owns no earth. We have attached the flimsy capitalist dreams to ownership that has given rise to so many problems we have right now. But Mother Earth doesn't belong to nobody. We are all rentiers on this very land. The day we die, we become the fossil and eventually come out as oil, either in someone's vehicle or flying some aircraft. Or also you become, as Carl Sagan would say, stardust. The borrowing space is very important for us to even think that we are capable to think. And this borrowing is where you also become a negotiator. You just don't become a participant, but you become a co-participant. And this co-participant gives the same responsibility and onus of a person who you are sharing this space with. And it cannot be one, it can be many, it can be institution, it can be government, it can be anybody. But this space is you versus the other, and your agency is equally established in this stream. Second, the social of giving. Someone else giving you the space of sociality. You take, someone giving and you taking is the given social, which means, simply put, if I recognize you as a sexual minority, if you're a gay person, if I don't acknowledge your gay identity, that means you are still trying to make a case about your gayness. If you are a Dalit and I don't acknowledge you for your being, you are still trying to make an appeal to this aspect. And this very element that we have is where we give socials, the giving of sociality, the giving of social space, social recognition, social identity. And this giving always has an unequal relationship, because someone is giving and someone is receiving, and always giver controls and also describes the rules of the future engagements. The third is acquiring. This is where a subaltern takes, speaks for him, her, or themselves. This is a very important location where subalterns have actually described that they can acquire. If it is not existing, if you are not giving, if there is no space for borrowing, I will acquire it. I will acquire it by any means necessary. probably sometimes by revolution, sometimes by conversation, sometimes by just following the rule books. But this acquiring gives more agency, more rights, and more hearing to my sense of. Now, within this social of three types that we have now established, the borrowing, giving, and acquiring, now we have to think about how science fits into this. Science, as you all know, is basically science is a curious concept. Curiosity piques science, which means if a scientific discipline has to offer anything, there has to be two fundamental aspects for a science to sustain. One is a question. You need a question for science to thrive. And second is the quest to find an answer to that question. You do not necessarily need an answer always, but there is a tryst of various minds to find an answer to that. Science basically is this, and that's why science is not highbrow intellectual project always. Science happens every day. Our mom is a scientist. Our grandmom is a scientist. Our father is a scientist. Our working people are scientists. These are the people who are unrecognized scientists of our world. Simply just because they don't wear a cape of a scientist or they don't wear an apron with a doctor as a prefix doesn't make them less of a scientist. The scientist, as a science discipline and scientism, has actually come about in the modern Enlightenment era of European Renaissance, 200 years later of that, where science was still maturing, and everything people thought was science was equated to a thought of anti-religion. Science was related to developing a temperament of rationalism. Whenever rationalism was brought, that's why Galileo was condemned to death when Galileo aimed to challenge the church. And science basically is challenging the status quo. Whatever status quo you have, and that status quo could be church, could be temple, could be mosque, could be government, could be authority. Science provides us that thinking that you could also engage in critical conversations, find answers to the questions that have not yet raised. Raising questions is one part of this discipline. So within the scientific discipline, what we do is once we have a question, we have evolved certain methods, certain variables, certain theories, sometimes deductible, sometimes addictable, which work together for you to then come to a relative conclusive answers. It might not always be absolute answer, and that's why science is always there for us to cherish upon something that is yet not to be known. So right now what we have is what the science says. Is that an absolute answer? We don't know. Who knows, in the future Einstein theory is still challenged. Although Einstein's theory was considered the most cutting edge achievement of the past millennium. Yet in the 21st century, his theories continue to receive enormous challenges that we have. Now let's club together the social science. The idea of sociality, the social, and as well as the idea of science. When these two club together, we come to an enormous market of ideas, an idea that is relating to the social aspect. And when we say social aspect, we immediately recognize that its ramifications are very physical. And that's why social science is a very broad discipline that fits its narrative around what we call now independent disciplines, or also some in some context they are called also identified as subdisciplines. And each subdiscipline, of course, is its own expertise. And the modern science, what it has done is it has segmented. So if I belong to a certain stream of knowledge, that is my field. I need to be an expertise in that. But if you look at old time or ancient or even medieval era scientists in present language, they were not expertise only in one subject. They were writing about cosmology, but they were also artists. And then like Galileo, as I said, Michelangelo, as I said, but also in the Indian context, the various philosophers that we had up to the Buddhist philosophy to the modern sciences, people just were not engaged in one vocation because the questions were so vast that it required a transdisciplinary approach. You just couldn't answer. Buddha couldn't be Buddha if he was just studying religion or if he was just studying theology. Buddha had to transcend boundaries for us to then put the critical lens on ourselves. So social sciences could be considered anthropology, archaeology, economics is part of it, then the human and social geography, history, law, especially the legal jurisprudence that falls into the social aspects of judicial and treatments of the issues. Then we have linguistics in a broader context. Linguistic name Noam Chomsky is one of those recognized linguist scholars. Then the political science is a discipline, social psychology, and again, the last but not the least is sociology. Now, these are not absolute sub or disciplines within social sciences. There are many, but the broader categorization of these disciplines, and that's why we have departments in various institutions about social science. Within social sciences schools, we have various departments that cater to these needs. I need not belabor the point of how or where do these disciplines emerge, but it is enough to say that these disciplines help us grow the social understanding of our society. And it is the social sciences theory that directs the attention and channels the navigation of the discipline of human societies. Social science is concerned with the cultural and social aspect of society. And when I say society, it also means individual. Individual is part of society. Let us not make a mistake of describing society as a whole mass. So, in Indian context now, coming back to it, social sciences historically, if you look through, let's say, anthropology or sociology, it has been a discipline of Brahminical scholars, and most of them Brahmin scholars. If you consider sociology, two of the most prominent sociologists that we have in the past century we had were Gurye and M.N. Srinivas.
Yes.
One Maharashtrian Brahmin and the other one Tamil Brahmin. Both have written enormously on the questions of caste, religion, Hindu practices. Yet their theories, as much as they are important and they become important source of knowledge, remain to be challenged because the emerging social science in the form of Dalit social science
Correct.
try to challenge and subvert the hegemonic understanding of Brahminical social science, because whichever discipline any group or caste or ethnicity engaged with provided that view through their own experiential understandings or outlook. They couldn't go or transcend the boundaries beyond how they looked at it. Yet the science discipline makes it more prevalent, and in the, as I said, in the post-neoliberal era, this new challenges have been thrown open, but also during their time too, social sciences continues to navigate the discipline. In the 20th century, social sciences was given a new identity and new space, excuse me, for it to thrive in India under the stellar intellectual leadership of Dr. Ambedkar. He was one of the first anthropologists in India who tried to decipher Indian society through an anthropological lens. Anthropology was still very recent discipline. He in his stay in Columbia University, when he was working with Alexander Goldenweiser's mentor was one of the founding members or founding thoughts of anthropology, Franz Boas. Franz Boas was an immigrant who came to America. He was escaping, and he wrote, of course, about the caste relations and racial relations. And one of the sophisticated theses of caste also was written in the 19th and earlier 20th century. This legacy, of course, is being presented to us by our friend Jesus, who has kind of given us the genealogical thought. So why is social sciences important for us? Because it shapes the public thinking. Second, it gives us more metaphors. Third, it gives us new methodological innovations to introspect and self-critical and self-criticize and look at the self-criticism to find new answers. Because it shapes public thinking, because it gives new metaphors and it encourages for a self-criticism, social science becomes an important foray in our life. Now, let me break down that three aspects to you. The first is public thinking. Journalist writings are one of the most important mediums of changing or shaping public thinking. How does then one or journalist discipline change what they do? Journalism borrows the social science concepts.
Correct.
They take whatever research is happening within the social science discipline, whatever scholars like myself or yourself or other scholars who write, get written in the newspapers, and then that media then popularizes this. And once it popularizes, it then gets into a public consumption, and then of course public consumes it. Many metaphors that we use as a normal lingo are actually academic canons. But then it has become normalized and it has been used widely. It's to the credit of this public acceptance of this knowledge through a journalistic medium. Second is metaphors. Social sciences innovates new metaphors. For example, if social sciences keeps on talking about Dalits as being, say, Harijans, of course, the concept of Narsi Mehta, of course, then taken by Gandhi and then rejected by Dalits themselves. Social sciences, if it continues to develop on these things,
Yes.
social science also had a responsibility for the gender parities. If social science continues to ascribe a gender norms in a stereotypical fashion,
Yes.
then that gets replicated, and of course, then society tends to accept that as a science because it is coming as an outcome of a research. And rigorous laboratory-based research always gets recognition because that's a knowledge that is not taken out of the whims of air. Now, if we proceed within the metaphors are not only about identity or nomenclatures, but also metaphors of one's status and one's relation to society. There could be hegemonic, there could be equal, or also there could be thinking of various levels. But if social science takes that as a responsibility and tries to usher an egalitarian principle, because if that is the project of social sciences, then we can imagine a new alternative imaginaries of world that continues to cohabitate amongst us. If social sciences is pessimistic and if it is providing to the cause of the rich and the ruling class, what it does is it denigrates the life of the poor and the oppressed, the landless and the manual scavenger. Social science owes a responsibility to the most marginalized. That's why the metaphors that it continues to inject into society needs to be responsible coming from the most marginalized people. And of course, third, as I was saying, the way the public shaping thinks, not only through journalistic, but how people then try to relate to this. Social sciences then, of course, becomes our rail track, one is to next to each other. And that's why we always tend to rely on them to find new questions for our existence. And within this broader dynamics, what we do is we develop new research methods. We develop what we call new terminologies, which are deployed in our society, encouraging to think them in certain direction. If I want the society to think in certain way, I would need that research to back up my thinking. If you are thinking that BJP is the only alternative party, if I want to change that thinking, I need to develop new methodological concepts for a normal public to know that 15 lakh is not going to be deposited in your account. That were the flimsy promises. But people, if they believe in that and if they live with that hope, it is the responsibility of a social scientist to show the honest mirror. And that mirror also means being self-critical. And the Greek tradition erupted from the aspect of self-criticism. Yes. Self-criticism has been an important locus for you to imagine. If you are unable to stand and look yourself through self-critical lens, then you don't stand a chance to engage with society on an equal level because you have already declared your position as a god. And if you are a god, you are unquestionable, you are invincible, and you cannot be re-questioned. And that's why even in my philosophical development, I put a critical lens on myself, my community, and an extension, I look at the world through this self-critical lens. It is not to berate myself, it is not to berate my people, but it is to be true to the testament of Buddhist ethos that talks about inquiring, investigating, getting convinced, and then proposing. Most of the time, we don't inquire, we don't investigate, we don't convince, but we propose it because it's a rhetorical response. It is a rhetorical requirement for I to respond to a certain wild comment that is coming on my social media post. And because of lack of this patient engagement, what we do is we corrupt our conscience of our parental indoctrination of their love and the ancestral legacy that bequeathed a certain wisdom that upholded these values. The third point of this, if social science is relevant in India, we have to understand that whenever knowledge was developed, it always had a risk of either being misused, appropriated, or exploiting other people's experiences. And no better discipline than anthropology and sociology. This has been criticized widely by the emergence of new Dalit social sciences, mostly Dalit sociologists and Dalit hermeneutical tradition of humanities. Of course, Gopal Guru, Vivek Kumar, Raja Dhale, J.V. Pawar, even Siddha Lingaya in your part. And of course, there are a vast canon of thinkers who are provided. Within the social science discipline, unfortunately, the linguistic hegemony continues. If I write in English language, I get recognized. But if I write in Marathi, Kannada, Tamil, I only get confined to that nation state. And this is one of the harbingers of how social sciences has taken its takeoff through various pedestals, be it pedestal of my own university campuses, or be it the pedestal of someone else's institutes who are proffering certain school of thought. Indian social science, unfortunately, has unable to produce a unique social school of thought that could be globally recognized. There were a few attempts, of course, made by subaltern study scholars of the Bengali Bhadraloks who appeared to offer, and of course, it was a successful experiment in the post-colonial canon, which aimed to, of course, derive from the Gramscian tradition, very much a Marxist thinking and philosophy that was trying to give more attention to the organic impetus of the people who don't sit in university campuses, who don't have the academic titles, but yet become the knowledge producers and knowledge conveyors. Gramsci was a firm believer in that, and of course, this is how the subaltern studies discipline come about. But within the Dalit intellectual stream as well, we see Dalit literature, Dalit sociology kind of taking its place, but yet still it is in its yet to be more mature stage. It's in its early days. And for it to mature, right now, we have university campuses dominated by young Dalit as well as non-Dalit subaltern groups who are undertaking rigorous research in institutes of higher learning, universities, and various colleges where cutting-edge research is taking place. But due to lack of methodological approaches and a proper investment in their intellect, many of this research doesn't get to see the light it deserves. And that is why we see social science is still lagging behind to provide a new direction. So when the Brahmin scholars studied caste, most of the time the Brahmin scholars, when they studied caste or through a social science exploitation, there was a charge against them that they are misusing, appropriating, and exploiting the experiences of the poor marginalized people. If I am going and studying and experiences of the people who work in the brick kiln factories, I'm going to write a perspective as a researcher where I would propose that I want to be someone who is not part of this, and that's why I can be an objective. Objectivity is never an absolutism in any kind of scientific inquiry. I can change my loyalties, but I cannot be absolute that I'll be objective. But this devotion to the absolutism has actually provided us just one entry into the critical questioning of how this discipline comes about and where does it manage or plan to take us. The Dalit social sciences has started criticizing the appropriation of their experiences by the Brahmin scholars. And when they criticized the Brahmin scholars, they propagated a hegemonic relationship and what Gopal Guru calls it a Jajmani system. Because when a Savarna scholar writes about Dalits, he or she or they think that they are doing a favor on Dalits, that if I do not do this, nobody will do this. And that's why it is upon me to provide a intellectual leadership for the Dalit intellectual experience. This needs to be countered because who gave you the right to disclose these experiments? Who gave you the right to even talk about this without having the necessary understanding? And that's why M.N. Srinivasa's very famous but also equally criticized concept of Sanskritization. Sanskritization was, of course, proposed through a study in a Tamil Nadu village, where it was observed that the outcasts or the untouchables, the Dalits, were the people who were constantly in the need of imitation. Imitation is, of course, not a new concept that eventually was proposed. It was Ambedkar who took this from Gabriel Tard. Gabriel Tard embarks on the theory of imitation because imitation is more luring, is more important, and it's more survival. I need to imitate a person who is hegemonic. If an actor, if an actress, or if an influential politician or a person who inspires me, I want to imitate that person because I want to acquire those qualities. It is not necessarily a negative thing. It is your own tryst. It is your own need. It is your own necessity for you to have a meeting point, as I say, the tryst of ideas, for me to have a new understanding of myself. I cannot be the same person that I was 10 years ago. I need to evolve, and evolution is part of how you imitate. And imitation is not necessarily a bad thing, but the way it was proposed in M.N. Srinivasa's theory was that these are the people who are trying to imitate the upper caste, and when they are trying to imitate the upper caste, they are trying to give up their Dalit self. And of course, it's criticized. Vivek Kumar hits back and says Sanskritization is not about imitation just to try to be an upper caste, but it's trying to get away from the negative stereotypes that you have. So it did not necessarily mean I'm trying to be like an upper caste. If I have changed my last name, I am not trying to be like a dominant caste or an oppressor caste. I am trying to just negotiate myself. And because I can afford to negotiate myself, I have agency. Nobody is forcing me to change. I'm also voluntarily participating in that. And I think that questioning has to retain constantly into our mindset whenever we ask these questions. And so again, the question remains, have the Brahmin scholars put the self-critical lens of describing their own Brahmin community? Had M.N. Srinivas or Gurya written a thesis on Brahmins? Had the Bhadralok written an entire gamut of literature on the Bhadralok attitudes? Have the Shudras written anything beyond, of course, Kancha Ilaiya on the Shudra economy and Shudra development? Have they also put a lens of why Shudra derive pleasure from beating blue or killing, massacring, raping Dalit people in the villages? These are the questions that social science pushes us to interrogate. And self-interrogation is where we are willing to be vulnerable. Without vulnerability, science cannot come about. And because if I'm not willing to be vulnerable in front of you, you will not be able to comprehend the sense of idea that I'm proposing to you. That's why when Dalit social science or Dalit sociology criticizes the intellectual space of Brahmins writing about this, also simultaneously they say Indian sociology has not done enough to take the question of caste. What does that mean? Does it mean then that the Indian dominant caste sociologists should have done more on caste? Or does it mean that they are trying to say you need to create more space for Dalits to acquire the space of journalistic forays? These are the kind of questions that continue to be almost always get discouraged and not attended in any of the academic conferences. Final point before we open up to questions. The Dalit social science has subverted the hierarchical discipline of knowledge-making industry in India. Has it been successful? Partly yes, largely no. It has managed to, though, bring out the non-caste experiences of Dalit as a subject, and subject in the sense of self-experience, not others' experience. And this is a difference when we need to do a research. That's why when we are, for example, doing a COVID research, we are putting the subjects, human beings, into this test. We are not trying to derive the results from animals only. And this is the kind of self-experiential knowledge that social science holds an important role in. That's why, because social science has the capacity to subvert any form of hierarchies, it continues to be most rejected discipline of science, most underfunded discipline of science. Social sciences doesn't get adequate exposure, adequate attention for the very capacity it deserves. At least in the Indian context, the Indian Council of Social Research, as well as Universities Grant Commission, continue to play the politics around what kind of research needs to be done. Science has its own politics, but science has always been one steady constant. It has become Brahminical. It has never given its Brahminical lens. So even in the social science development of post-independent India within the socialist canon, there were two prominent thoughts that were brought about. One was, of course, socialism derived from Marxist thinking, and the second was liberal, that was again derived from center to the left or center to the right thinking. However, a conservative or right-wing thought always was present amongst the Marxists and amongst the liberal thought. Why? Because the agency of Brahminical actors who were on the right were also the agencies that belonged to the left as well as liberal school of thought. The social science field could not grow much but limit itself to certain few scholars only, and it could not be a democratic exercise just because the discipline was arrogantly placed under the hands of Chakrabortis, Joshis, Deshpande, and other Brahmin names who continued to control and, of course, fall into the lines of Western academic discipline because they borrowed heavily from the postmodernist literature and thinking, and, of course, replicated that forcibly rather into India. Did social scientists among Dalit community not existed before? They, of course, they did. They wrote heavily. They couldn't write in English because English space was not open to them, but they wrote enormously in local languages, or what we call the regional languages, which of course is its own universal canon, and they provided a new thinking. However, due to the linguistic limitations, a scholar writing in Malayalam is not accessible to a scholar who is working in Bengal. Similarly, a scholar writing in Hindi belt is not accessible to scholar who is in other part of South India or even the eastern part of India. And that's why it's upon us the need of new social science to now start taking this responsibility upon themselves to now start imagining that if social science has to thrive, it needs to be democratic. And it just not be democratic, it needs to be radically democratic in the sense that it gives opportunities more and more for the thought lived experiences of people who can write more than autobiographies, who can write more than short stories, but who can actually describe sociology. And that's why Dalit literature is a social science that has an archaeology of knowledge, to borrow from Foucault, but also has a sociological implications. And more importantly, it theorizes a history of a being, very much borrowing from Heideggerian notion that the beingness is in relation to other beingness. But I can be me without ever you being you, meaning I have my own agency, you have your own agency. If you don't have your agency, I can still be me. Let me not just be me without being you. This is a complicated understanding that we need to frame, because Dalit intellectual space, Dalit social science exists alongside. If social science is unable to work alongside Dalit social science, it won't thrive in India, and of course it won't become relevant. The very aspect of this is presently the whimsical thoughts presented in 5,000 or 4,000 years ago in some random text written by some Brahmins is now considered as a science, and even Indian Science Congress continues to describe that the aeroplanes were discovered in India, as well as the first surgeries were developed in India, and all kinds of mobile towers and mobile phones existed in India. This is the failure of social science, because it has not given enough armament to the people to think conservatively. Why does people still believe that Vedic science is superior? Why do people even think that there is a science that could be ascribed in the times of Veda, or the science or the times of a medieval or ancient era, which is not compatible to current times? This is simply because social science has not investigated enough to make rationalism a public movement. It has actually criticized from a distance to a certain religious conservative movement by calling it names, instead of going inside and challenging the very doctrines. And that's why we see people in poverty find temples. They don't find universities or books to their answers. And that is one of the challenging metaphors of the 21st century social sciences in India.
Dr. Suraj, thank you very much for this lecture. I really have no words to describe your lecture because I was almost involved. Thank you very much for sociality of borrowing, giving and acquiring, public thinking metaphors, and also telling us how sociology is deeply immersed in spreading Brahminical ideology. Before we take up general questions, I have a couple of them. One, you've also explained this in your book, but still, it would be better if we brought this into discussion. We restrict Dr. Baba Sahib as the father of Indian Constitution. So, if we break this shackle and understand him as father of modern social sciences or father of post-independent social sciences. So what's the road ahead for subjects like sociology, economics, and especially law?
No, thank you for that question. And I think you have asked a very important question. And I think this is why we need to look at Ambedkar as a scholar first. Ambedkar is a very bookish man. He loves ideas. He loves to live in the universe of ideas. If you would not disturb him with anything, he would just sit surrounding with his books and he would read and read and write and write. Because you see, you imagine, this man is a very curious thinker. And that's one of the prerequisites of science. He is a very curious person. He wants to have answers to many things that are coming in his head. And these questions are not necessarily only relating to his community, but these are like existential questions, right? The approach to Buddha is very much an existential question.
Correct.
He's a deeply spiritual man, but also he is a man who is not having a, I mean, if he gets time, who knows, he might write on cosmology because that is a discipline that continues to, endure. And that's why Ambedkar, we have to appreciate him as a scholar simply because not only his academic work, he has 2 PhDs, and he has, of course, he's a barrister, he's a legal theorist who writes new legal, of course, he wrote much of that in India's constitution, but also in various memorandums that he presented, or also various laws he wrote when he was either the leader of Independent Labour Party, or, these are all the legal engagements that he has done. Baba Sahib Ambedkar many times gets mired within the second class, I would not use second class, second rate thinkers of his time or politicians of his time. That's injustice to him. I've already made this argument. When you compare Ambedkar with other independent era leaders, you really decrease his status of his intellectual acumen. His caliber is something that is, tell me any independent leader of his stature who had 2 PhDs, that too in economics. Just point me out. Nobody. That means Ambedkar is a very person. See, Gandhi had 1 degree only, which is a barrister. He just got a barrister. Ambedkar had barrister plus 2 PhDs, and of course 2 MAs and bachelors, and of course you know that he went to 3rd PhD as well to acquire. So for us to understand the potential of Ambedkar as a social scientist, we need to remove him from his from the obvious appreciation of him being the leader of Dalits or him being the leader of India's independence struggle. He is primarily a thinker, and I would rather look at him as a thinker because he helps cherish the otherwise moribund philosophy or thought of our existence. And that's why in his academic training also, and of course Partho Chatterjee has written about it in the book Radical Ambedkar, about how Ambedkar is actually coming about as a political theorist that we really not have paid attention to. The political theorist is proposing on the nation state. But what happens is we are so casteist that our caste vulnerability gets triggered whenever we see a Dalit voice talking prominently. And we try to fixate that according to our insecurities.
Correct.
See, if a woman is very competent and she's a fast runner, but my insecurity about her is she should be in the home or she should be doing this. So I will only relate Hima Das to the very insecurities that I look at as woman. But if I look at her as a champion, as a runner, that's a different thing. Similarly with Ambedkar, as well as intellectual stream of thought, what has happened, especially on the Dalit side, is they were immediately compared to unequal, and I say this with not with disrespect to anybody, but I say in that you are comparing this gentleman or this thinker with somebody who is not, who doesn't want to even, it's like, it's fine. You are a politician, you have a Bania capital behind you, you have all the kind of things. I'm not that. I have a different project. And if Ambedkar had a luxury, I don't think he would have even spent much time doing all the things he had done with fighting all these people. He would have just ended up writing books after books, even though his writing still spans to, as we now know, 24 volumes, and more are coming still.
Uh, Suraj, there are many questions, but three of them I think speak about the problems that are there in Dalit movements. Of course, we can answer that, but I have one request to them. Please read his book completely because he discusses his book is he has written a 300-page book, and out of 300 pages, around 187 speaks about the issues that are there in Dalit revolution and Dalit movement. So that book itself is an answer. But would you like to say something about that? Three questions are speaking about internal problems that are there in various Dalit movements across India.
I mean, it's not only Dalit movement; it's every movement they have problems,
Correct.
right?
Correct. Yes, yes, correct. Correct.
So I don't understand why there is this obsessiveness with Dalits having so many divisions, so many problems. I understand where it is coming from, but what I'm saying is we don't operate in a monolithic space.
Correct.
I cannot represent the Dalit community.
Yes.
Neither anyone else can. We all have independent voices.
Yes.
Yeah. No. This very logic of why do Dalits have so many divisions and internal politics? Well, because they can think for themselves. They are not lambs following Jesus. They have their own thought, and they can think about themselves. And I think this is not peculiar to Dalit community. In every community, in fact, in our own household, we have problems. So I think that's reflected in and of course, for a larger cause, can we be united and all is a question that we can of course explore on a independent lecture as to how to then come to this.
Okay. We have one question. Let me read that out to you. This is by Avinash. I think he's studying in TES. I've been trying to pursue a research question for a while now. It is to see caste system from the perspective of evolutionary psychology. I had a problem. Evolutionary psychology says that social identity is not an evolutionary trait, but the impact of such social stratification is quite obvious on human evolution. Marrying within caste does propagate the same genes. How do we look forward? And how do you think we can address the problem I mentioned above? Thank you. This is by Avinash. Shall I read to you again?
Yeah, I think because there were 2-3, I think I can see 2-3.
Yeah, I will break it. I will break those things. Yeah.
That would be good.
First, this is Avinash, and second thing is that he's basically okay. He's trying to locate caste system within the perspective of evolutionary psychology,
Beautiful.
and he has an issue there because evolutionary psychology says that social identity is not an evolutionary trait, but the impact of such social stratification is quite obvious on human evolution. So his example is that marrying within caste does propagate the same genes. So how do we look forward and how do we think we can address this problem?
That's a deep question, and I just hope Avinash continues to research in the evolutionary, field that he is trying to work through. And I think that's an important question. And I think Avinash, I certainly would not have a certain specific answer simply because I am not well versed and upbeat with the discipline that you are trying to make fora into. But of course, I can talk a little bit about the genetic theories that I've read, and I have a little bit of understanding. Of course, David Reich, who's a colleague here at the Harvard Medical School, him and I spent some time, and he gave a perspective how this evolutionary dynamism doesn't work. And I think if the evolutionary, is it science or biology, Arvind?
Evolutionary science, but the example that is giving is related to biology.
Yeah,
Because
so I think that's
genetics. Yeah, genes. You're speaking about genes, exactly.
yeah. So I think that's why we have a thing, because evolutionary science also has its own limitations in the sense that the way it caricatures society, and that's why I'm saying that's why the natural science and social science always have been contradicting with each other most of the time. And if you see, very rarely, for example, an article published in the science journal, people, very few read from social science discipline. And I think that's been the historic divide. And it's not necessarily a wrong or bad divide. It's just been the our own different kind of questions that we try to answer in various forms. As regard to the caste question and the evolutionary kind of logic of that, I think there is a point you are making, that marrying within the same caste in this kind of reproduction of same genes, and of course how do we then, because then of course then the social aspect then gets challenged there, right? If you intermarry, what do? The genes get mixed, and then of course the evolution has an evolution needs to be hybrid. I mean, in case people don't know, people have a very wrong idea that evolution needs to be very much in its original form. And I think I would just offer my introductory comments on that, Avinash. Unfortunately, I may not be able to deal with more simply because I just don't know if I would have any specific, because also the question in a way is very complicated, but thank you for raising that.
Yeah, Suraj, a couple of them would like to talk to you. I would request, they are in the academic field, I request the organizers to help Bhairappa to go on live. If I'm audible, I request the organizers to help Bhairappa to go on live.
Yeah, Bhairappa sir is online. Actually, he's in the panel.
Okay. Mr. Bhairappa avare, tavu dayaviಟ್ಟು unmute ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡು ಮಾತಾಡ್ತೀರಾ? Would you like to share your experiences? Bhairappa, if you're listening to me.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, please go ahead. Yes.
Yes, sir. Sir, namaste. My name is Bhairappa. I am from Kuppanahalli village in the Kolar district of Karnataka. I belongs to SC caste laborer family. After completion of my PUC, my family is not able to send higher study. Then I worked with my family with a laborer, as a laborer, and I studied degree in the subject literature, history, and economics. Then I came to Mysore University. I studied Kannada MA and I got rank. After completion my MA, I worked as a journalist in Prajavani newspaper of Karnataka for 1 year. In this time, the UGC JRF was passed and I was selected for the fellowship for the PhD. I gratitude with my PhD under the guidance of Dr. Krishnamurthy Hanur. He is a multidisciplinary thinker and a senior scholar of the Kannada literature. My PhD topic is cultural conflicts in the Kannada dramas. Now, I am involved in the literary and cultural research as an associate fellow at the Center for Classical Kannada in Mysore. In this meantime, I have suffered numerous insults for a cause of the caste since my childhood. It was my mother, my teachers, and my Ambedkar who inspired me to read, stand up, and be equal to everyone else.
Beautiful.
My mother worked as a common activist in the Dalit women and other struggles. In spite of Dad's opposition, she's participated in Dalit Sanghar Samiti and Mahila Sanghar Samiti meetings, struggles, and told us with my brothers what she saw and heard. That is why Ambedkar began to literally and consciously descend with us. I still remember it. Every time my mother sing a song of Ambedkar, Ambedkara helida maatu, marayabedi, maretu, malagabedi. This song reminds me again and again. My teachers for my elementary education. My teachers from my elementary education to PhD, I have illuminated my cognitive pursuits as lights. Forgetting the caste, they have give me books, clothes, even bicycle also. And that increased my awareness through enduring courage and inspiration. Hereafter, my Ambedkar, who constantly transcades images and keeps within me. I have seen many Ambedkar's presentations from my childhood up to now. From untouchable Ambedkar to Dr. Ambedkar was constitutional sculpture of the modern India. Many Ambedkars have been seen in my life. While studying for my MA, one of my girlfriend guiding me that we should needs to look at the cultural research perspective of the Ambedkar when looking only the Ambedkar in political phase. My dear friend argued that Ambedkar should not be read as one-sided, but more versatile in his thoughts. From there, we had to work on Ambedkar's path of the cultural research. So far, we have been involved in research projects such as Dalit theatre, Dalit autobiographies, Dalit sensibility in Indian culture, and so on. It is our firm conviction that caste pains, insults, and other insults can be overcome by the collective strength of our own multicultural awareness and modern knowledge. Thank you, sir. Thank you for opportunity.
Oh,
Thank
indeed.
you,
Indeed.
one and
Very
all.
good. Very good.
Thank you.
Bhairappa is reading your Radical Ambedkar right now. And just one more. Soumya, are you on live? Soumya,
Thank you,
Soumya.
Brother Bhairava. Appreciate that thought. Very encouraging. You gave me strength.
Yes, he has very similar childhood that you have had. Soumya, could you please come online? Soumya teaches English.
Soumya is online. Madam,
Soumya,
please.
please go ahead. Soumya, am I audible?
Am I audible, sir?
Yes, yes, you are. Dr. Soumya, please go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Hello, sir. Thanks for a wonderful lecture.
Your voice is too feeble, Soumya.
1 minute. Is it audible now, sir?
Oh, yes. Please go ahead. Yes.
Thank you for a wonderful lecture, Dr. Suraj Yengde. And I'm just curious to know about your stance on the subaltern studies. I mean, like the existent scholarship in India today tries to, categorize subaltern as something exotic. Do you believe that it is just an attempt to exoticize the scholarship by saying that subalterns do not have voice, they do not have agency? Is it like, I would be interested to know your stance upon this thing.
Just to add to Soumya's question, Suraj, what's the intention behind your smirk the moment she mentioned Bengali monist subaltern studies?
No. Thank you, Dr. Soumya. This is a very important question, and I think you and I and many of us have to start, debating this. And we just have not to have to debate as a rhetorical response, but as an academic exercise. We cannot just, have a flimsy refusal, but we really need to provide an alternative, solid response to this. And to give my 2 cents on this, Dr. Soumya, the subaltern studies has, as I've already said, an important intervention. But again, the exoticization of Dalit or Adivasi body is very much relating to what the colonial fetishization of native bodies have happened. It's almost a corollary. But our Brahmin friends who were intellectual vanguards, they did not consider themselves as colonial type investigators of our societies. And that's why what has happened is they took it almost as a nascent right on themselves. They took it as a spiritual duty to write about this, but simultaneously criticize the Orientalism.
Correct.
How weird of that is to not categorize Orientalism that exists. Of course, Gopal Guru characterized this as a reverse Orientalism. I call this Brahminical Orientalism because it's more how Brahminism kind of operates in these spaces. To look at the subaltern studies project, or if you are talking about subalternism, I think it has always existed, Dr. Soumya. Simply that because they were not having a designer suit or designer ties and sitting in Harvard or Cambridge doesn't mean that they were any less of intellectuals. It's just that their knowledge never got recognized or never got purchased as an important repository. Many of my friends, Oxford scholars, and we call Oxbridge scholars and stuff like that, and even in here Ivy League schools, they work with the Dalit or subaltern communities, European white scholars, and they do good effort. I mean, there is nothing wrong in how you exoticize this thing, and of course, that kind of remains to be critical. But then that remains as a canon, that remains as a theory. And now, all of a sudden, an Adivasi student who gets into university has to now all of a sudden read Marx, or all of a sudden read some European thinker of recent times who has described his community. Sometimes, it is good, but sometimes you also have to have your own voice, and that's why we have to change the colonial influence on our knowledge. And colonial is not just mean 200 years of British influence, it's also mean the Brahminical colonial experience that kind of transcends boundaries and knowledges. And you all know the major innovations that were carried out in India were carried out by Dalit and Shudra communities, who in their innovative capacity, because for you to innovate, you need to have a space where you are putting your physical and mental labor at work. If you are just sitting in one place, you cannot produce innovations. What will you do just by sitting in front of a god? You will discover new techniques to trick the other person, but you will not innovate. Innovation comes when you put your hands into the mother earth, or you put your mind to the task, and that's how you develop new thought. And that's why, Dr. Soumya, my short response is this thought has been existing. Now it's upon us to give more spaces and more ideas, recognition, and let it be translated. If you ask me, I would like to have a translation institute just to translate all of this various language literature in each other languages. Because India is itself a whole continent, and it's unlike Latin America, where they speak most of the Spanish, or there is some indigenous languages, but Spanish is mostly spoken. In India, it's difficult. For example, in Canada, there is a whole Kannada nationalism, the whole pride of Kannada, the whole history of Kannada, the whole cultural canon that my brother was just talking about, writing a PhD on the cultural aspects. That needs to be then conveyed. Now, what I do, due to the lack of accessibility to Kannada, I unfortunately have to read what is translated in Kannada. Doesn't mean they are wrong or I am wrong or anybody's wrong. It's just that limitations have been imposed. So that's what we need to do right now, is acquire English language. Without an excellence in English language, unfortunately, that has been this thing. So for you to be a competent fighter, you need to enter or qualify into the Olympics. For you to qualify into the Olympics, you need to play by the rules. Now, once you are in this, then you can change the rules. So for right now, we can all be critical and be negative about it, which I am supportive of. But also, what alternatives do we propose? Is it just that we are going to cry foul and just stop there? I think in addition to criticism, if you have a productive response by academic production or new stream of thought beyond cliches, is I think where knowledge can be found.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Suraj, and thank you, Soumya. We will just take up 3 questions together. And before that, just 2 things. Professor S.N. Sridhar works at Stony Brook State University. He's a very renowned linguist. He has a comment. He says that excellent idea to translate the studies from one regional language into the others and to English. So shall I repeat? Was it audible, Suraj? Yeah. S.N. Sridhar works at Stony Brook State University, New York. Yeah, he has a comment and he says excellent idea to translate the studies from one regional language into others and to English, and he's doing it to a large extent. Let us take 3 questions together. Dr. Ramesh says, I will combine 3 questions and 1 statement later. Dr. Ramesh says, in the light of Dalit activism, what is the future of, I think the question is little garbled. Okay. Is it turning towards radicalism? That's what he means, 1. And there is another question which asks, what is the road ahead? Like, you have identified the problems in Indian social sciences. So what's the road ahead? That is 1 question. And there is 1 more. It's very practical and very important question. What are the ways that we have to adopt in order to fill the seats, especially reserved seats that are vacant in the premier institutes of India? So these are the 3 questions. And 1 statement that I would like to make, that is, there are several questions that is asking for an alternative social science model. I'm not sure if Suraj would agree with this me or not. This is a very, caste matters is a very, very good example. So, and also there are a lot of, and also 1 more thing, all sections of each section of this book starts with 1 or the other quote. And in many sections, he uses Marathi folklore and folklore of other languages as well. So he identifies sociology in the common life of human being. So I personally say that, of course, I'm having my fanboy moment, but still I'm saying this is a way of doing Indian or indigenous sociology, or as Suraj was saying, Dalit sociology. I think we should do more of this kind. So Suraj, please answer for those 3 questions.
Thank you, Arvind. And I think I need a support. I'll just pick up on your last point because that's more recent on my mind.
Yes.
Actually, that text is actually Indian social sciences. That was my attempt to de-Brahminize, decolonize our way of thinking.
Correct.
And to kind of go to Dr. Sridhar's point is absolutely, that's what I try to do. There were some quotations that I couldn't get translated. For example, I need to work on Ayutithas, and I really needed to read an entire thesis of course, my friend Gajendran, who wrote his excellent PhD, of probably the first Dalit after Ambedkar to write a PhD at Columbia. I had to read his thesis to get that a quote. The reason I bring that is that I have changed the way we have to look at these things. You don't really need to use fancy words, or really don't need to have a certain large pronouncement. Of course, the original thought is still there, but I have removed many of the redundant references from the text. Many scholars had a problem with that, as to why did you not do this, do that. I'm like, I don't know who you are, and I don't care about your opinion as long as my grandma is there. She is a theoretician of social sciences for me.
Correct. Correct.
My mother's experiences, her poverty, is what trains me to trail my intellectual canon towards that direction. So these are the new kind of ways we are trying to change. We are trying to tell through our experiences, but also we are not trying to exoticize our own experiences. We are also trying to not ethnicize our experiences. We are just trying to look at it as a base of knowledge. I don't need to read any European era, so medieval era European text or Indian text to feel relevant to me. I mean, I am me. I represent my life. And if I feel there is a value in my life and my experiences, I sure will describe that as something that belongs to a modern school of thought. And I think that's why we need to now start reimagining Indian social sciences. Caste matters is very much an attempt, and also the radical in Ambedkar is an attempt to intervene in the Indian social science. And of course, as you can see, it's not a casteist space, it's a space of everybody. But of course, here the responsibility is more upon the shoulder of Dalits like myself to now give a new direction. So under our thought, even the scholars, Kevin Brown, Partho Chatterjee, and various kinds have accepted that, yes, we can work with you under your leadership, if you will, in the way the new thought is proposing. So I think that's how it is. And for me, the new Indian social science is a part of how Dalit social science forms. And again, Dalit social science is not a ghettoized, marginalized space. It's still very much part of Indian social science. It's very much like a doctor. A doctor will not tell you sweet things. The doctor will tell you the truth. If you have a pain in your stomach, the doctor is not going to use flowery language and hide from you. And that's and same goes with your mother. Your mother is going to tell you that you messed up. Doesn't matter. She's going to tell you, you messed up big time, bro. Now you got to fix your shit. Yeah. And that's what Dalit social science. Dalit social science is the mother and doctor of Indian society. It tries to provide the truth. Now, to going with the first question, I don't know what radicalism is. Like how does one describe what is radicalism? For me, being Dalit itself, being assertive Dalit itself is radical enough. I mean, damn, like, wait, what? He's a Dalit and he's proud of his identity. He is proud of his grandmother. He is trailing on the thoughts of his ancestors. He is willing to challenge the notions of injustices. That for me is radicalism. So if you ask a question, is Dalit movement moving towards radicalism? I think its existential question equates radicalism. What was the second question, Arvind?
That question was about what are the ways that we have to adopt to fill in the vacancies in the primary institutes, especially IITs and IIMs, and of which you have been very critical these days. That's why.
That's a very, that's why our political praxis also have to equate with it. And I'm in support of that brother who has raised, or sister who has raised that question, because even now, I think there are 8,000 plus seats that are not filled in central universities, as well as the universities of the government-sponsored education institutes. For that to happen, I think we have to take over. IITs and IIM cannot function without Dalit and Adivasi and OBC professors. That's how simple it is. You cannot have certain dominant caste minority sections just entering this space. We have to be radical, we have to be revolutionary enough. And that doesn't mean we have to take arms and fight. That's a very mischievous Western definition of revolution. Revolution is Buddha's revolution. Ambedkar, when he acquires or describes revolution, he talks about Buddha. Buddha's revolution is a change of thought and change of epochal thinking, which is very much relate to human consciousness. We have to be revolutionary in that spirit. And for that to happen, I think we have to start Band. IITs, IIM should not function. No central university should function. Doesn't matter. COVID has already stopped us. Caste is bigger pandemic than that. Let COVID smoothen down. Let us bring the casteist pandemic to the front and expose them. And without the hiring, no institutes should function. The students should occupy the local communities. For example, in IIM Bangalore is there, all the Kannada people who believe in the justice and equality should just acquire the Indian institutes, not only Bangalore, but other institutes, for it to be more diversified. Why do you acquire? Because you want constitution to be implemented there. If you believe in constitutional values, if you believe in the values of Indian freedom, if you believe in the basic ethics of justice, every thinking person should do that. If you don't do it, these institutes will be agraharas, from one agrahara to another agrahara, another agrahara to another agrahara, and you will become the pitiable Shudra who is just trying to appeal to the conscience of Brahmins or the dominant caste who are not going to pay attention to you.
Thank you, Dr. Suraj. Just one last request. Do you have anything to say to all those Dalit students who are undergoing depression during this period? Or to all the students in general?
Yeah, I think we should address all the students. And again, thank you, Arvind. This is a very, very deep question to me too, because I think mental health is a very serious social issue in our society. It has a lot of stigma. And I really request people who are undergoing any mental stress, distress, depression to acknowledge that mental health is an essential necessity. We all undergo that. The way our body, if it gets a scratch, you can see the wound. And then you can apply certain ointment or certain plaster for it to heal. Our mind similarly is wounded. We can't see the wound. Nobody else can see the wound, but we can feel and experience. And we need healing. And for that healing to happen, we should really acknowledge that this is a problem. Let us remove the stigma. The whole stereotypes that have been instigated. For example, a mad person is considered mad. There is nothing mad about that person. It's just the way person thinks differently. The person has a different attitude. And again, Michel Foucault has written about it extensively. And of course, in Birth of Clinic, how mad people were castigated. And of course, they were meant to be the outcasts. We cannot afford to exclude and ignore our own mental health issues. Mental health issues are very real simply because we live not only in pandemic times, but we live in a caste pandemic time. So this continues to happen. If I read a newspaper every day, and if I'm seeing a Dalit atrocity, if I'm seeing a Dalit woman getting humiliated, getting raped, a community getting arson, the huts being burnt, poor people in Madhya Pradesh recently with the front of family, they were beaten, any heart will cry. No one can see a child crying to the police, begging their charity not to beat their father. That's a heartbreaking picture. Any sane person who has a consciousness of love will tear into pieces. Nobody can afford to do that. And I think we have these instances repeating amongst ourselves. We really need to find a space to heal. The healing can happen only with you, but also there are healings that can happen collectively. Some people have actually made a business out of healing. All art of living and all this kind of second-rate buffoons who have proposed this idea of spiritual healing is not really providing enough to overcome this. Spiritual healing is not only for myself, but for me not to inflict harm on others. We cannot have selfish mental health intervention. We really need a composite understanding of that. And for that, I really urge you to think about compassion. If you have a daughter, if you have a child, if you have a son, if you are yourself a son or a daughter, if you are a relative of somebody, there is something that makes you what you are. It is the basic essential of love. Why does then the love get corrupted? Is your mother so weak that her love becomes secondary and the hatred becomes primary? Is your father's care so useless that irrespective of his attention to you, you overlook his care and become a monster by not caring about other person? We really need to be those vulnerable people. We really need to be fragile. And we really need to be open to have this dialogue. In countries that I met, for example, in Japan, it's a very sophisticated, respecting institution. All we need in these days is dignity. If I'm walking on the street and someone disrespects me, I get into anger. I want to fight. Our quest of giving dignity is very momentary. If I just respect you, Arvind, you are a beautiful man. That's all it takes for me to avoid the potentialities of this depressive conflicts. The depression that we are having is a social depression, but also it has to do with individual. What we do is we are very emotional people, and especially the Dalit people are very emotional people.
Right.
Why? Because emotion is the only one that keeps them intact.
Right.
If you lose the grip of emotion, you will become a monster. You will become a vigilante. You will carry the weapons and you will slay everybody who is going to be challenging to you.
Right.
So in these times of depressions, I just want to appeal to all of us, including myself, as we are part of a larger community, to every being, every thinking person, that your life is as important as the life of my mother, my grandmother, and myself. If we are able to adhere to that, and we all have moral science lessons. There are so many spiritual energies in India try to propose that very fact, but it gets corrupted in its practice. We are hypocritical compassionates. We only give compassion to what suits our ego, what suits our enigma. We are unable to be vulnerable. We are not open to be fragile and there to be broken, to be rebuilt again. We are just there as a uh, rigid monk, which is not willing to abrogate any of these rules of our failures. And I think for us to come out of depression, we have to understand that uh, that if this is all the world can give, that means we are strong, because there are far worse tragedies, and I think this is one of the worst strategies of our possibly era. And if this is the worst and you are still surviving, you are still striving every day, you are looking outside your window and trying to look at the sun, admire the sky, and look at the beautiful birds, try to derive inspiration from the flowing river or just the musical tones of whatever musical genre you feel comfortable with. I think that's the kind of inspiration we need, because this is a temporal time. After this, you and I have to sit next to each other, have a dinner together, have extended talks together. We cannot succumb to any of these issues right now, because frankly, as much as you are depressed, I am too. Every one of us too. It's not a unique experience, and we should not berate if somebody is having a clearly mental health issue, simply because the mental health is a real problem, and it's a problem that can only be tackled if we humanize it. We cannot demonize the mental health issues, and people are afraid to speak up. Like there was nowadays people are speaking. There was a very much a stigma where women who are on period would not talk about I'm on a period. But right now we see there is a new generational thinking where they speak openly. They tell their friends, I'm on my period. I don't want to, I'm having a different mood of sort. Let's not. We also have to now evolve that thinking. And I think it's you and me, the youth people, the people who think about rationalism, who think about respect, needs to now uplift those voices. And if you find anybody in the circumstances of distress and depressive circumstances, what you need to do is provide your compassion to them, provide a relief arm to them, provide a hug to them that they need, and more importantly, if you can, provide an attention to them. Try to hear them up. Don't denude, don't withdraw their sense. Simply because they are going through something doesn't mean they are permanently like that. It can be healed, it can be treated, it can be addressed. And believe me, India is a country of mentally sick people. Everybody is mentally sick this or that way. If I'm inflicting harm upon you, I am a mentally sick person. I really need to overcome that, because who will harm other person for no reason? Why will any troll get on internet hiding his or her identity and just start talking nasty about it? That means that person is really suffering through serious family crisis, or maybe the person is undergoing depression. Who knows? But those people continue to inflict harm of themselves upon others. We have to be more vanguard to that as well.
Thank you, Dr. Suraj. And before I request Sridhar to thank the audience and you, just one information. Suraj spoke about music on a very lighter note. If you go to his Dalif video, you can see him dancing on Zingat. It's very good. Yeah. So Sridhar, over to you.
Sir, hello, sir. First of all, thank you very much for accepting our invitation, and it has been a pleasure to listen to you. It has been a privilege to listen to you. It has been a wonderful session, sir. And on behalf of Government First Aid College Bellavi and the rural students who study there, and all the staff and all the participants, I thank you very much, sir. Thank you for coming to this session and speaking with us.
No, we
And
should
I
thank
also
Sridhar. Thank you, Sridhar. You have made this possible.
Sir, I am Sridhar.
Yes,
Sridhar. I mailed
yes,
to
yes.
you. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Because ours is a very small college, and most of the students come from rural and unprivileged background, and they're all listening to you. And thank you very much for again, sir. And I also thank Arvind Mitra, who hosted this session and spoke very well. And I must thank our honorable principal. And our honorable principal, Dr. N.H. Jagdish, who allowed us who gave full freedom to organize sessions like this, and all the staff of Government First Aid College, Bellavi. And I also thank all the participants who participated actively. And there has been more than 40 questions posted here. But due to the time constraints, we couldn't ask all of them. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Suraj sir, again. And sorry, I forgot. I also thank Prashant sir for coordinating with us for this session, and he has been constantly in touch with us. Thank you, Prashant sir.
Yes.
Sir, can I stop the live stream now?
Thank you, Suraj. Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Yes. Bye, Suraj.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Suraj, now you can press the leave meeting. Yeah.
Okay.
Arvind sir, I will stop the live stream now.